Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming. I am Denise Bussey, the Strategic Partnerships and Events Manager at Witness. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you guys about all that's been going on in the social climate in the US with my colleague Corin Faife, who is a ETO, Emerging Threats and Opportunities in Tech Advocacy guru. Corin's going to be talking to you all about everything from filming protests to the current climate with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, how to film, how to protect people's identities, and what you can do to get involved in the fight for justice. So with that said, I am going to kick it off to the amazing Corin Faife.
Thanks, Denise, and hi, everyone. Okay, so thanks for inviting me here today, inviting us here today. And I should also say thanks to everyone at Vimeo for the partnership that we have ongoing with Witness. It's much appreciated, and it's really nice, for me at least, as someone who isn't part of that, to connect with more of you and kind of give you back some of the ways that we're thinking about the work that we do. So yeah, this presentation is I created it just for you here, and it's the cameras that are new. And as Denise mentioned, I'm going to be talking about some practical tips for how to document protest and some of Witness's kind of best practice guides for that, but also really put this in the bigger context of police violence, specifically police violence against Black people in the US, the history of that. And some of the kind of assumptions that we make when we record it and when we use video as a tool. And then also talk about Witness's bigger mission around the world and the work that we do day to day. Yeah, so this is me, Corin Faife. I'm the senior coordinator for the Emerging Threats and Opportunities Research Program at Witness. What it basically means is that I'm looking at everything which is to do with the impact of emerging technology on the effectiveness of using video. So I do a lot of work around disinformation, the way that it spreads online. We have a big research program on deepfakes at the moment and the way that AI can be used to manipulate video and things like that. And yeah, so the one thing that I should say, we have a kind of a multimedia presentation today. I've got a few different video clips to show you, short clips as well as talking. There's a kind of a slight trigger warning for some of them because we are talking about police violence. So we do have some scenes of police violence. There's not a lot, but you know, I think it's important to mention that. Yeah, so with that we can get going. So, you know, I wanted to start by just really placing us in this present moment. I guess not that anyone really needs reminding, but all of these protests were sparked after the death of George Floyd, which happened at the end of May 25th of this year in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that might seem like a long time ago now because so much has happened in between, but it is really not. I have a short video clip here of just some of the news when this was kind of breaking news just a few days later.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. We're coming on the air with the latest on the wave of protests and unrest taking place at this hour across the country. Outrage at the death of George Floyd, an African-American man, while in police custody in Minneapolis nearly a week ago. In city after American city tonight, thousands of people have once again taken to the streets to express their anger, frustration, and solidarity with others among them with different agendas, seeking to perhaps hijack the demonstrations, engaging in violence, vandalism, and looting. It is a precarious moment for this country, still in the grip of a pandemic that has claimed more than 100,000 lives, shuttered businesses, and left 40 million Americans out of work. We're covering this story from coast to coast this evening. We want to go first to California. Miguel Almaguer is in the coastal community of Santa Monica. Miguel, what's the story there tonight?
Well, Lester, over the last several hours, the situation here has really deteriorated. We're not far from where some serious looting was just underway a short time ago. Police have been on the move all day long, as have been protesters and demonstrators. who are playing a cat and mouse game with officers. We've been hit with rubber bullets, we've had tear gas fly in the air, and police are trying to push these pockets of crowds out of certain areas. It is a very fluid and dynamic situation right now. For the most part, the protest behind me and just up the street here is peaceful, but that was not the case a short time ago. We saw rocks, bottles, and other objects being thrown at officers who were returning fire with rubber bullets and gas canisters. People are certainly very concerned here. The protesters have scattered across this region, but one thing is clear. While there is a heavy law enforcement officer on the ground and also in the air, they have lost some businesses here to looters. We saw several businesses getting looted for several minutes. You can hear the sirens in the background. It's a fire truck coming down the street here because we're told not far away there's actually a small fire that has erupted. So this is the situation playing out here, Lester, in Santa Monica. A curfew is now going to be enforced by officers, but they have lost control of some neighborhoods. Lester?
All right, Miguel Almaguer, just outside Los.
Okay, so that's putting us in context, and then also pretty typical in a lot of ways of the way mainstream media will sometimes cover these protests. So, of course, we had a reference to the cause of this whole thing, but then a focus on how police responding, which areas have devolved into violence and looting and that kind of things. It's really worth bearing in mind because it's a pretty typical pattern. But so here's a piece from the New York Times reminding us, Black Lives Matter may be the largest movement in US history. Certainly, if we're looking at all of these different areas where the protests occurred on the map, I think that there has, I remember seeing somewhere that there had never been another movement where there was a protest in every US state. Some of these are just kind of small protests, a few hundred people. In New York, if any of you are based there, we had regularly protests with thousands and thousands of people day after day. So in some respects, this is really unprecedented. And in other ways, it's not. So I just want to make that point. This is kind of the newest instance of some processes that have been going on for a long time, both in terms of the violence, the cause of the violence, the way that the violence is documented, and these results in people pushing back against it. So I wanted to talk about another name I'm sure you're familiar with, and the portrait maybe not so much, but this is Rodney King, who famously was attacked by the LAPD in 1991. He was pulled over for suspected drunk driving, pulled out of his car on an interstate not far outside of LA, and viciously beaten by a number of Los Angeles Police Department officers.
What most Americans saw when they watched Rodney King struck 56 times by white policemen, a jury saw differently.
Not guilty of the crime of assault by force, likely to produce great bodily injury.
Shock quickly turned into anger.
The same way I'm angry, you should be angry, you should be angry.
And anger turned into violence.
The trouble began Wednesday afternoon at this intersection in South Central Los Angeles. Cars attacked, the occupants beaten and robbed. At first, no police responded, and when they finally did, they left almost immediately. It would be hours before they were mobilized, and even then, much of the looting would continue with impunity. But today, Police Chief Daryl Gates defended what he called a balanced response.
We had what we thought was an appropriate response. We were trying not to be provocative. We didn't want to bring out a self-fulfilling prophecy.
The concern was that a massive show of police force would only aggravate the disturbance, but that strategy failed. By the time police did respond, they were overwhelmed. Critics say the police should have mobilized before the Rodney King verdict and deployed at the first sign of trouble.
It led many to ask what happened to the LAPD.
Quite frankly, we were overwhelmed. Our response, I wish, I'm a perfectionist, I wish it had been much faster, but it was not.
So as you can see, there are really a lot of parallels there in the way that report is presented, both in terms of the incident that caused it and the fact that the beating of Rodney King was documented on camera and that footage was released. And then also in these coverage of the subsequent riots that erupted, far more time being given to the looting, the police response to it, and so on, and in some ways just kind of glossing over the actual cause of the whole thing. But again, Rodney King was not a kind of new event. You know, before Rodney King, another name you might be familiar with, Emmett Till, a really famous case of a 14-year-old boy, in fact, who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. So that now is 65 years ago, well within living memory for people of our grandparents' generation. He was lynched after a white woman made a false accusation that he'd been sexually inappropriate with her. There's then a very famous photograph of his body afterwards, the open casket at his funeral, and his face, you know, just disfigured from having been beaten and burned and so on. But even before this, I mean, we don't know how many other cases happened where there was just no one around to record it, whether by camera, by film, anything like that, spanning back not just to the 1950s, but really hundreds of years beyond. And so that's why I took for the title of this talk, part of a quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates: "The violence is not new, it's the cameras that are new." And he said this during an interview to promote his book, Between the World and Me, which is a great book. If any of you have read it, it's written in the form of a letter from him to his teenage son, explaining the world that his son is going to grow into as a Black boy, becoming a Black man, both the joy of it that he will find and the challenges that he's going to face too. So Witness is built around this principle. The cameras are something new, even if the violence isn't. And so we support people who are using video and who are using technology to defend human rights. Whether that's in the US, where we have a lot of programs, particularly around policing and police violence, to elsewhere in the world. And I just want to show you another short video that actually talks a bit more about some of our global programs and just really connects the way that we think about video in the US to some of these other struggles elsewhere.
This is Bore. Bore captured the cruelty of forced evictions in Cambodia, where the government has bulldozed and destroyed entire communities for profit. As thousands of people continue to fight for their homes, Bore exposes the truth behind their struggles. Meet Bukeni. Bukeni filmed children as young as 8 years old who were robbed of their childhoods and forced to become soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Bukeni's footage and advocacy helped convict militia leader Thomas Lubanga of war crimes. Lubanga is now behind bars. This is Laura. Laura helped expose the mass killings and disappearances of Mexican women and girls, whose only crime was to have been born female. Laura's story of one woman forced authorities to recognize widespread violence and to work towards a day when women don't just disappear. Mary first picked up a camera at age 60. She interviewed older men and women who suffered abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and put faces and voices to a silent crisis. Mary's interviews helped pass landmark legislation to protect vulnerable older Americans. Raja supports citizens and journalists in the Middle East who put themselves in danger to capture scenes like this one in Syria. Raja connects activists with resources they need to document the turbulence around them more safely. These activists have turned us all into witnesses. Many risk their lives to share these stories. But to honor their courage, we must do more than just witness. Join us to create a global community of activists. Help us fight human rights abuses throughout the world. Help us expose the truth, one video at a time.
So that's a bit about what we do at Witness, but also fundamentally it's about what the same kind of thing that you're doing at Vimeo, in creating a platform which anyone is able to use to share video from wherever they might be in the world. For us, this is just a quick overview where we have programs. So in the USA, of course, we have a big program in Brazil, some operations in Latin America. We have some team in Mexico, smaller regional teams in Africa, covering the Middle East and North Africa as well, and the Asia Pacific region. So it really is a global team, even if it's a relatively small team that very kind of has a lot of experience from all around the world. So for the third part, I wanted to just point out that, as we've already seen in various different examples, video is a really powerful tool. It's something that can be used to hold people with power and influence to account, to expose their wrongdoing, to expose human rights abuses which affect vulnerable people, people without power everywhere. And because of that, it is not something that we can take for granted. The right to record is something that is constantly under attack in the US and abroad. In the US, there are certain protections to the right to record. So because of the Constitution, particularly the First Amendment, legally speaking, the right to record is pretty well protected. But if you have ever tried recording police violence, and we're going to talk about that later, there are many ways that they will try and prevent it and try and hinder you from doing it, intimidate journalists or just citizen bystanders and so on. And so because of that, part of the work that Witness does is about defending the right to record, whether here in the US or elsewhere. And if you are, if you're interested in that specifically, we have a section of the site called the Witness Media Lab, which is about documenting different kind of techniques for working with media. And we have all of these case studies where we're talking about the right to record. The most recent stuff that we produced in this vein was looking at COVID specifically, and actually looking at how in many instances, the lockdowns that were imposed as a pandemic protection measure were actually used to just control the population. There was a kind of an increase in authoritarian power, and we produced some tips for people who were trying to document that, explaining how they could do that without putting themselves at risk. At risk from both COVID and from the police response. So, contrary to what you might have heard from Gil Scott-Heron, no disrespect to him, maybe the revolution will be televised. We see so many of these scenes now of video driving, uprising, and protest. And particularly now that so many people have smartphones and are able to record, we see video as a tool as a very democratic tool, and not something that is just controlled by the kind of elite broadcasters. And so because of this, Witness as an organization has had an evolution in our 25 years or so of existence, from originally providing hardware when we were actually giving people video cameras, telling them how to use them, that kind of thing. We still provide training now, but we produce a lot of resources which are distributed digitally, explaining how people can safely and effectively use video from their phones. And we also do a lot of advocacy to tech platforms about how they can best support people using video for human rights, human rights documentation and advocacy, and particularly what kind of measures might be detrimental to that. And so this is another, we have a big section of resources about this. The address of this page, I believe, is witness.org/resources, and you can find things about shooting video, documenting protests, and so on. There's way more of this. There's just a limit to how much I can fit in one screenshot. But if you're interested in that, go and check it out. So during the protests here in the US, it was a big opportunity for us to really put that expertise out there. And Palika Makam, who is our US program coordinator, did a great job of actually going out to the protests herself and doing some teach-ins, as they're called, setting up informal workshops and just explaining to people who were there how they could make the best use of the phones and cameras and so on that they had available to them. So I want to show some footage. Palika also did a great job of actually recording herself giving some of this advice. So I'll play a clip where she goes into detail about this, and then afterwards I have a summary of it and a few kind of points to pick out.
So if you're at a protest and you want to document police violence, which I highly encourage you to do, there's a few things that you can do to make sure that you're safe and ethical and impactful. First thing is to know your rights. You have a First Amendment constitutional right to film law enforcement in public spaces. You just can't interfere, and whether or not you're interfering is completely at the discretion of the police officer. So try to stay at least an arm's length distance away, or at least like a car's length away. If police officers tell you to back up, it's best to comply. You can even film your feet to show that you complied and that you were walking away. Before you go out to a protest, it's a good idea to have a legal number. This is the National Lawyers Guild hotline written somewhere on your body or memorized in case your phone gets stolen or confiscated. Police do not have the right to take your phone, search through your phone without your consent or a court order, but they might do this anyway. So it's important that before you go to a protest to have your videos and your photos backing up to a cloud so that there's an additional layer of protection in case you lose it. You also want to have at least a 6-digit code on your phone, not the Touch ID or Face ID or pattern lock. If you are filming, try to just focus on law enforcement, not on anybody who's protesting. If you do share that footage, you want to make sure to blur out faces, any identifying markers, tattoos, affiliation on shirts, things like that. Remember, we're using our phones to expose law enforcement, not our fellow protesters and civilians. Film details: are police officers using excessive force? What weapons do they have? How many agents are there? Are they working with different agencies? Are they holding their weapons? Do they have protective gear on? Are they using any hateful languages, slurs, things like that? We want to be recording this. These are important details if we're going to use this footage for advocacy or evidence. A few other filming tips: try to hold your phone horizontally. You get more information in the screen that way. Try to take your elbows over your hips like this so they sit like a tripod so that your shot is steadier and isn't shaky. Instead of panning kind of rapidly, you want to have slow, steady pans to really be able to see what's happening for a lawyer or a journalist later. Don't immediately share your footage. You want to pause and think about if there's any identities that you need to protect or blur out. YouTube has a free blurring tool for this. Do you want to protect your own identity? Do you want to upload this with your name attached to it? These might be things you want to think about. Often we see that protesters' footage is discredited, so we want to be able to prove that our footage is real and that we filmed it where we said we filmed it, at the time we said we filmed it. Some easy ways to do that are to film landmarks, the outsides of buildings, street signs, your home screen that shows the time and date, any kind of verifiable landmarks, things like that. It's best to let the footage speak for itself. If you use biased emotional language, it can hurt its chances of being able to be used as evidence in court. So if you do narrate, stick to facts only. Timing is also really important. As we saw with the George Floyd video, the video was released after the official police narrative, which can make a really big difference in being able to highlight and expose those discrepancies. So before you share, take a beat, take a pause, think about what you filmed, who you could be incriminating, and how you can make a bigger impact. Share it with an advocacy organization or a lawyer or a trusted journalist first.
So yeah, so that was Palika Makam, US program coordinator, doing a really great job of being coherent, much more coherent than I could have been with all of that noise and movement around her. That video is really great. It was shared a lot on social media because she got so many good tips into the space of a short video. Just to summarize a few of them. So as I mentioned before, you have a constitutional right to record, provided that you're in a public place. There really is no reason that you would not have permission to record any kind of event that is taking place around you. So that's different if you're on private property, whether it's someone's home or their land or whatever it might be. But in a public place, you have the right to record. Nonetheless, law enforcement officers will often try and discourage you from recording. They may not tell you that you're not allowed to record, but they will try and maybe block your view. They will tell you that you are interfering, and you definitely don't have a right to interfere with someone who is making an arrest or something like that, which is why one of the things that Palika said is if you are told, if an officer says, well, you're interfering, stand back, actually document with your camera the fact that you're complying with what's being said. So you can even turn your phone down to your feet and record the fact that you're backing up, or even just say on video, yes, I'm getting out of your way, whatever it might be. Another useful tip is to focus on law enforcement and not protesters. Generally, though, you might want to focus on someone if they are actually at that moment being the victim of some kind of police violence. Generally, it's best to keep other protesters out of it. You don't really know who is in the video. It's very hard to obtain consent to show them and things like that. And so it's just a good idea to keep filming the people who really are deserving of that scrutiny. Steady your phone, I guess, is just a good recording tip wherever you are. But as Palika showed in the video, a good way of doing that is to hold, instead of holding your arms outwards, you can kind of hold them in and balance them against your stomach or against your hips. You can steady it against a wall or anything like that might be close by to you. That really helps. And if you're going to be moving, rather than any rapid movements, try and always pan slowly and just keep a nice continuous shot. Filming landmarks is also something that is really useful, particularly for anyone who is after the fact trying to verify the video and confirm that it does show what it says it shows. So, if you're in the city somewhere, that can be just filming the street signs at an intersection, filming any kind of landmark, even just filming a house number that can then be confirmed. Okay, number 99 on this particular street does look like house number 99 that was shown in the video, things like that. Back up to the cloud, because you never know what's going to happen. You could lose your phone, it could be taken from you. And then one of the last tips that's worth thinking about is it's not always best to share that footage immediately. This is, again, thinking of it in terms of the people who might be documented in the film. Police can and do scan footage on social media looking for evidence of illegal activities. People have been prosecuted after the fact for things that were shown in video. And sometimes it can be a better idea to actually wait for the official version of events to be publicized and then come forward with video that can contradict it. And we've seen a lot of cases, and we've supported a lot of people in Witness who have done that to good effect. So I wanted to pick up on another thing that Palika talked about, which is kind of, I think, particularly relevant to you at video, which is thinking about blurring and anonymity. So, protesters can be identified by a whole range of different things. Faces is the most obvious thing, but people can have very identifiable tattoos, hairstyle, clothing. It can be the way that they walk. It can be a badge on their jacket, whatever it might be. There are a lot of different ways that protesters can be identified with video footage. So it's really worth thinking about how we protect people's anonymity. Witness has been talking about using blurring and the importance of having blurring available as a tool within video sharing platforms. We've been talking about that for years now, actually. And more recently, I think it may have been around 3 or 4 years ago, though I'm actually not sure about that. Following some of our advocacy, it was adopted by YouTube, and they incorporated a very easy to use face blurring tool in their platform. And I just have a very quick video showing how that works.
How can you blur that out if you've already posted it on YouTube? I'm gonna jump to my computer and show you exactly how you can do this even within the YouTube platform, so you don't have to worry about deleting that video and losing those views. All right, to get that blur feature, what you wanna do is go into your video manager and pick that video. Then you'll wanna go into edit. From here, you wanna go up here to enhancements and go over here and click blurring effects. All right, now if you want to find the spot in your video that you want to blur, let's just say I'm picking right here. I want to either blur a face, which I can edit, and it's going to go ahead and blur my face. You can see it's processing right now. Once it's done processing, the face will be blurred. So if you want to do custom blurring, so maybe I want to just blur this out right here. I'll go to edit. You'll want to hit the space key where you want the video to stop. You see it says it right here. Then you can add exactly where you want that blur to be. So I'm going to click right.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have anyone on this call from the product team, and perhaps actually this is already something that you've considered at Vimeo, I have no idea, but really making it as easy as possible for people to preserve the privacy of other people who might feature in the videos that they're sharing is something that we really advocate for, and it can be a great help. So another thing that I want to come to is that not all of us actually have the option to be out there filming protests and other things every day. We might just not be in the right place. People also sometimes can have very valid concerns about their safety. Sometimes people might have physical health problems, mobility issues, any kind of thing. So really not everyone can be out filming all the time, but there's plenty of other stuff that you can do, particularly using social media, and curating video that other people have taken can also be very powerful. So this is actually something, just a small kind of social media based project that I did in June. I had been to a lot of marches in New York. I had seen a lot of provocative tactics from the NYPD. And a lot of people were also tweeting these videos as well. So usually very quickly after a protest, some of this footage would emerge. And I just started compiling other people's videos into a thread that was specific to what was happening in New York City. And it was inspired, as I said at the bottom in the next tweet, by a guy called Greg Doucette, who actually had a huge national thread of all videos of police violence that he could find on social media. And actually, months later, or possibly a month later, I got an email from a journalist at the New York Times, and they had put together this article titled "NYP Says It Used Restraint During Protests. Here's what the videos show." And they had actually used a lot of the videos that I'd compiled in this article. So as you can see, I included this text that was at the bottom where they said the videos were compiled by lists shared by Greg Doucette, Corin Faife, and some other crowdsourced examples on Reddit. So it then ended up getting much more of a reach than I would have had through my personal Twitter account. So having talked about all of that, I just wanted to take a little bit of a step back and reference something which this person said. This is Gayatri Spivak, who is an Indian feminist philosopher, very famous post-colonial theorist. And she wrote a famous essay called "Can the Subaltern Speak?" And in it, she said, one of the things she said, "Some of the most radical criticism coming out of the West today is the result of an interested desire to conserve the subject of the West, or the West as subject." And what she talks about in this essay is the way that even often people hoping to do good, so whether they are people in the West writing critically about colonialism, whether they are even people within that kind of post-colonial framework, people in wherever it might be, India or places in Africa, Jamaica, so on, can still be actually reproducing these same narratives, particularly in terms of who is the subject, who has agency, and who is the kind of passive object, even when we try and critique these systems. So I think it's really important to ask what assumptions we reinforce by sharing videos of violence against Black people and calling these videos proof. First, as I said before, who has agency and who has valid knowledge? If we say that we need these videos as proof, then actually who is the we and who are we proving it to? Because Black people certainly know that there have been hundreds of years of violence against them, and that has really been foundational to the creation of modern America. So are we including the victims of these violence in the we, or are we creating a system where these are separate people? This is not something that we normally talk about directly, but I think it's really important to question in this context. So this is an article I read over the summer and liked a lot by a Black journalist and journalism professor, Alyssa V. Richardson. There's something from it that I want to read, where she says, not relying on a traumatic smartphone video to do the heavy lifting of in-depth reporting may seem antithetical to some who could argue that the public needs to see these videos to be able to exact justice. But the long-term success of Black Lives Matter will rely on substantive policy change. And policies change for marginalized people only when their whole personhood is acknowledged. Thus, this work is unfinished. The next high-profile case surely will come, and it is up to news media and media consumers to honor the victim's full life story more humanely. And so in light of that, I want to come back to a slide that I had at the beginning and just say, you know, some other details of George Floyd's life. You know, he was a star, a high school athlete. He got a basketball scholarship to go to college. He was active in the Houston rap scene. If anyone knows DJ Screw and the kind of chopped and screwed movement, George Floyd was actually peripherally associated with that and featured on some tracks. He then, later in his life, having been involved with drugs and criminality and so on, actually became very active in church groups and tried to mentor young men around him and help people not make some of the same mistakes that he had made. And he was, you know, like all of us, a full and complete person. And sometimes these things really get, these people really get reduced to these final traumatic results that, you know, these incidents that at the end of their lives, and we actually forget that there was so much that led up to that. And, you know, that's true of really everyone that we hear in these headlines and that we say their names when we march and so on. So to kind of close this up, I want to say that video on its own is not enough. Video, like all technology, is really neutral. It's not good or it's not bad. It depends on how we use it. And across the country, there are a lot of groups like Witness and others who are very intentionally using video as a tool of police accountability and to work for other community change. And this is what we call video activism. And I have another quick clip. This is the last clip to show, which is talking about a great project that brings together video and technology to try and increase accountability. And it's a project that it was set up by Berkeley Cop Watch, and Witness gave some advice on implementing the project.
That is a munition that's not supposed to be aimed at people at that distance. That is absolutely in violation of policy and practice.
For over 30 years, Berkeley Cop Watch, an all-volunteer police accountability group, has been directly monitoring police activity in the streets. We have used recording as a way to deter police violence, as well as to de-escalate police encounters, document abuses, and advocate for justice. This video provides a quick overview of the database and tools that we, Berkeley Cop Watch and Witness, an international human rights organization, created to make it easier for us to organize the vast amounts of videos that we record and that people send to us. By improving the way that we manage our information, we can more quickly and effectively conduct investigations, organize justice campaigns, and challenge unjust laws, policies, and police practices. It can also help us preserve the history of our fight for our rights and our resistance to increased police power and gentrification. We hope that these resources can support others in doing the same. The Berkeley Cop Watch database allows our volunteers to search and enter data about incidents, officers, types of force, as well as link to multimedia, documents, and other information related to particular cases or people connected to the incident, such as witnesses.
So the Berkeley Cop Watch is a really great project, and the Berkeley Cop Watch database is, yeah, it's worth looking into. And for anyone with technical skills, there are a bunch of other similar projects I know that there's something being run in Chicago by an organization called Lucy Parsons Labs, a very similar database to make police officers searchable by badge number and let people upload video and try and tag and analyze it and so on. So I want to say, in conclusion, you could be a part of it too. We can all be a part of this. There are organizations doing this work that we can support financially. There are organizations that we can join and actually, you know, put our own labor, our own energy into it. But it's not something that happens on its own. First, we have to, you know, to make change in any kind of on any kind of issue, you need to first identify what it is that you care about and what the problem is, but then connect with other people who feel the same way. And once you have a network, start to try and organize and bring about change. So yeah, no one makes change on their own. If you care about this kind of thing, it's really important to find your people and find people that you can build with. And yeah, with that, thanks.